Disney now has made another Disney princess remake with The Little Mermaid, but is it enough to swim to the surface and win people's hearts? Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Section Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to talk about The Little Mermaid, which is now out in theaters. Now, I want to say this, right? Before I went to go and see The Little Mermaid, the new version in theaters, like not even an hour before seeing it, I had actually watched the original animated version from 1989, just because like I couldn't recall a lot of like the specific things from the film. Like I do remember the whole general gist of the film, such as, the Ariel and Eric romance, the songs like Kiss the Girl and Part of Your World. Some though, the final things that we see from the film, like of course Ariel and Eric being together, the fact that Ariel didn't have her voice. Like I remember the whole general idea of what happened in the film, but I couldn't remember the details, like the structure of the film. And I'm totally glad I did rewatch the film before seeing the new version, just because like I had seen the original and I had something to actually use as like, I guess, a benchmark to use and compare it to the new version that we got this week. And having seen that, I was able to pinpoint significant differences here and there, whether or not there were big differences or there were small differences. And having like seen what we got with this live action version, right, I definitely feel like I've gotten to a verdict about it. And I think at the end of the day, I think having seen this film, I was quite satisfied with the film that we did get. Like I think this is one of the few times that I felt like I came out of watching a Disney remake feeling very satisfied with what I got. Now, am I saying it's a full-blown amazing Disney remake? I certainly not. I think that there are definitely other Disney movies or Disney remakes that we've had gotten that are far better. Like I think it's really hard to just topple or even just top Disney's remake of Cinderella. I think that's the one that to me to this day is the best Disney remake. But I will say this, like with The Little Mermaid, there were some changes that were made that were so, I wouldn't say too significant, but were significant enough that it really did enhance a lot of what this film needed to kind of be different from Little Mermaid. And not just that, but also be a far more revamped and necessary modification and modernization from the original animated movie. Like, without a doubt, going into this movie, one of the best things about the live action version is, without a doubt, Halle Bailey. Like, she really carries this movie. It's like she was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this version of film, because of Halle Bailey. Which is really funny because like leading up to this movie, there's been a lot of controversy about her casting. I'm not gonna dive too deep into it, but a lot of people just did not have much of a belief for Halle Bailey to handle a big character like Ariel, someone who's as iconic as Ariel. But for me, like I gave her a chance, and having seen the trailers, I feel like the trailers themselves had really proven that a lot of the arguments being pushed against all the backlash against Halle Bailey was just unjustified. Like just her voice, just her ability to really sing, right? Just getting a snippet of that from the trailer, like I knew right away that she was going to prove her naysayers wrong. Going into this movie, right? Like the first song that we're actually going to hear is Part of Your World. And the moment they actually start that as an introductory song, immediately you can feel the chills in the room. The fact that Halle Bailey is able to start off the film with Part of Your World, at least being the introductory song, you instantly get a chill with how much of her vocal cords, how much of her voice versatility you can hear from all around. Like any time that she is singing on the big screen, like you get a sense of chill coming. Like there's so much emotion, there's so much passion that you're getting out of Halle Bailey when she is playing Ariel. It's just remarkable, right? Like the moment that she finishes off singing Part of Your World, I was having little chills down my spine, and people around me were just speechless. They were gasping. They were just amazed by just how remarkable that Halle Bailey was able to give such a remarkable performance as Ariel singing Part of Your World. And I think that like having something like that really just kicking off the film really started things off very well. So aside from Halle Bailey's ability to sing, because there's no denying that she can freaking sing, like I feel like that alone basically secured her role as becoming Ariel. But in terms of her actual acting, right, like there's a lot of questions about whether or not she was meant to really act out Ariel, because she isn't very well known as an actor. She's far well known as a singer alongside her duoship with her sister. But I think that having seen this film, she does a pretty good job at playing Ariel, because for one thing, like when we are thinking about Ariel, like in this film at least, like they do utilize a lot of the big changes going into Ariel's motivations going into the land area. Like for one thing, like she isn't just going there because of Eric, but she wants to go there because she wants to explore a world outside from the sea. And in this one, you definitely get the sense of all of those ideas being utilized with Ariel here, with especially with how she is characterized as a character. She isn't just somebody just, being clumsy and making some rash decisions. She is someone who's very fierce, someone who's very adventurous. You really get that side of Ariel early on in this movie. And I think with this film, Halle Bailey does such a great job of showing that innocence of her as well as her adventurous side, because it does make things very refreshing, very revamped with this Ariel that we see from the animated movie. And I think overall, like, let's be honest, like Halle Bailey does such an incredible job playing Ariel. Like with all the, criticism, the backlash, everything that was going against, Halle Bailey in this film, like without a doubt, she definitely, proved her naysayers wrong. She definitely showcased that she was capable of playing Ariel, that she was meant to play Ariel. I think overall, I think she was literally the perfect person to play Ariel because of the vocals, because of her ability to showcase this version of Ariel, and it worked very well in showcasing a different side of the Little Mermaid that gives it a bit more of a much more revamped, much more refurbished touch of the Little Mermaid, but also making sure that it's very modernized and not very, retroactive with a lot of things that they try to implement in terms of its themes and motifs and all those sort of things. Aside from Halle Berry's ability to really just, showcase her remarkable performance as Ariel and really showcasing her powerful voice, singing all the songs all across the film, I will say this, right? I think one of the things I also have to give compliments to is the way that they really executed Eric and Ariel's love story in this film. I feel like it's one of the biggest things I felt like really improved from the animated movie. Because I felt like the animated movie, like, of course, like the whole motivation behind their romance is a bit problematic, of course, because of the fact that the animated version of it shows that Ariel's motivations because of the boy, but in this version they do change up her motivation. Her motivation is more so because she wants to seek freedom, she wants her independency, she wants to go and explore the actual land area and move away from the sea, because she feels like there's something far more to see in breathing in the actual oxygen, breathing in the actual the land that she keeps seeing there, but but it's always been forbidden to go checking out because of the history with her family. And I think it's also worth saying that a lot of changes that are happening in this film aren't like dynamic major changes. They're kind of more like subtle details that happen here and there, like changing some of the motivation, changing up a little snippets of some of the dynamic, as well as a chemistry between characters. Like these are more so small changes, but even though they are small changes that don't necessarily change the structure of the movie from beginning to end, like the actual structure of the film's story remains quite, the same. Like it remains basically the same story structure that we saw in the animated film. Regardless of that, they do make sure that in between the film and some of the things leading up to some of the characters' motivations, some of their character arcs, some of their development, do have these small subtle changes that really, in a way, even though they're small changes, actually enhance the actual overall story that makes the movie so far more better in terms of its story structure than when we see in the animated movie. Example of this again is the Eric and Ariel storyline, because this is again one of the things that a lot of people were just wondering how they're going to improve upon, as well as the fact that they are making these changes. Now I will say this, I think in comparison to who has the best way of showcasing Ariel and Eric's story and their love story, without a doubt the live action beats the actual animated version. And that's because the live action feels far more organic, far more natural, and developing their relationship, developing their dynamic, instead of just making it so that Ariel just wants to go in and kiss Eric because of this this curse, this spell that she needs to basically fulfill. It's a matter of fact that she just wants to go and explore the world, and yet here's this guy named Eric who she seems to kind of have feelings for, and seeing that dynamic really just flourish day after day, time after time, showing that these two characters, even though they are technically strangers, with one from the sea and one from the land, like you can tell how much these two characters have so much in common, how much they urge for adventure, how much they want to explore the world. Because of the fact that they develop this friendship between the two, it really makes it so that their dynamic, their the eventual leading up to their love story makes far more sense. It makes far more organic. It makes sense why they are meant to be together. And because of these small changes that, we don't see in the animated movie, but see in the live action, it makes a live action version feel so much more appetizing, so much more fulfilling with what we do get in terms of this development for Ariel and Eric's story. And of course, just continuing off with the whole Eric and Ariel storyline, right? Trying to build up their romance, trying to showcase why they are meant to be together, why they start to have a crush for one another. You also have to give compliments to the actors, right? So, of course, Halle Bailey and Jonah Hauser-King. Like, the fact that they both are able to kind of just replicate their characters, but also improving upon their personalities, their motivations, and then trying to add that all up and mesh it together. And for this type of film, again, you gotta give compliments to them, because with all the changes that they do have to make, again, trying to showcase a more organic, far more natural development between these two characters, they do such a very good job of really just setting up this dynamic between Ariel and Eric, because of their performances, showing this innocence, showing their adventurous side, showing how they're looking around, checking out the town, and seeing how they have so much in common. You have to give them so much you have to give them a lot of acclaim just for their ability to really showcase a far more gradual development in their relationship. And I think that because of that, it makes the whole relationship feel really cute. And not just that, but I will say that a lot of times I was just thinking, wow, this gives me a lot of Bridgerton vibes, because again, it's really showcasing how powerful their romance is, how powerful their love story is meant to be, why they're supposed to be together. And again, because of these changes, it really helps, again, build up the rest of the film, especially leading up to the final act, where we again see why Ariel and Eric are meant to be together, why they eventually do and set off and marry, right? I think, having mentioned some of the changes, right, I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but I think most of the big changes that we do see come out in the final act. There are a lot of things that do happen in the final act that are very different from the animated movie, which again, it makes a lot of sense, because there are things that would work in an animated sense but would not work in a live action sense. But even with that being the case, right, because of the changes that they again made with the development, they made with the relationship, made with the dynamic, right, having seen those being implemented into the final act, you can see a lot of things being changed, especially in a way of how we see Ariel characterized as a character. Again, the fact that she's very adventurous, the fact that she's very daring, I think we see a lot of that happen in the final act. She feels far more active in the final, by getting up to the climax of the movie, because again, because of the way that she's characterized in this movie, she's far different than from the one that we see in the animated film. And yet, because of these changes, it makes it so that Ariel is still the center of this movie. Whereas I feel like even with the animated version, she sometimes kind of loses a grip of her, presence, her prominence in the film by the time we do get to the film's climax. And here with the live action version, they always make sure that she is still the star, that she is the one who we want to focus on. And they do so in a way that they really enhance a lot of Ariel's personality, her qualities, her characterization, and doing so in a way that this happens from point A to point B and never losing that grip, even in the middle of the film. Having spoken about things like Halle Bailey, Eric, and Ariel's love story, the performances from the actors, whether it be Hauser-King and Bailey, I think they both done such an incredible job in this film, really showcasing far more cute Bridgerton-like love story with Eric and Ariel's story. I think that there are things that I feel like is worth mentioning in terms of the side characters. For one thing, I think with Sebastian, as much as the fact that he is a bit creepy looking as this crab, which I'll talk about in the CGI in a second, but at least with Sebastian as a character, right? I mean, I will say that with the side characters that we do get in this film, whether it be the changes or returning the characters from the animated film, I will say Sebastian's definitely the one that really stood out as one I think was a bit on the positive side. I mean, the actual visuals of it is a bit creepy, and I'll talk about it in a second, but aside from the creepy visuals, I will say this, Sebastian still has a pretty important role going to this movie. He is the one who is far more capable, who understands what's going on and what he needs to do in his role to make sure that Ariel is safe and is able to fulfill what was agreed upon between her and Ursula. And I think that, and I'll say this, right, it's really incredible, because even though Sebastian, which I feel like is a very important character, I think in this film, who is, by the way, voiced by Daveed Diggs, who is in Hamilton, by the way. With Sebastian in this film, right? even though he isn't a very goofy character, he definitely does have a little subtle humor. I feel like he was definitely the one bringing in the comedic, relief into this film, which I feel like was necessary to kind of balance out some of the more sophisticated stuff about the movie. And I mean, that was the thing that really, again, surprised me because I wasn't expecting a lot of these funny aspects to this movie because, again, like, this is a live action version. I would anticipate that there's going to be a bit more of a grimmer feel to it because of the fact that it is far more live action. But even that being the case, it does kind of dime it down a little bit, trying to bring back some of the more family friendly feel to it by adding in the humor. And I think at the end of the day, it does work, and it's all because of Sebastian. Although it's really weird because he does have a Jamaican accent like throughout this whole film. So I don't know if that was if that was done on purpose or not, but regardless of that, like, Sebastian was definitely one of the things that did stand out as a supporting side of the whole film, because, again, adding in that humor kind of, again, enlightened the whole atmosphere a little bit. Aside from Sebastian being the more standout side character in this movie, the rest of the other supporting characters were a bit more bland. Like, for one thing, Flounder was definitely one that got, demoted a little bit in this version compared to the animated version. Like, again, it makes a lot more sense why, because of the fact that a lot of the movie, because it is live action, like, it's really difficult to really bring in Flounder into the picture when he can only be able to, be alive in the actual sea, and we don't see much of Ariel going into the water, as much so that she's mostly on land. And I think that again, a lot of that kind of takes away a lot of Flounder as a character from the animated movie, and demoting him a little bit to just, again, some snippets where it is possible for him to be in around, which I feel like it's okay in a sense. Like, I don't think that's too much of a big issue, like dimming it down a little bit as a supporting character, just because you do have to look into the realism of things if you're going to make a live action film. I think that some of the more biggest issues I did get out of it is, like, for one thing, King Triton, like, it was okay. Like, I just really didn't get much of a vibe out of him. Like, Javier Bardem does his best to really showcase King Triton in this movie, but, like, I mean, aside from, like, the ending where we definitely get a sense of this relationship between Ariel and King Triton, I wish there could have been a far more focus on King Triton and giving us an idea of who he is, how he's feeling, trying to give off the sympathetic side of who King Triton is, so that way we can understand why he's feeling this way, why he has his feelings about the actual land people. I mean, they do bring up this one thing again regarding this connection regarding his wife, and how because of this dark history behind it, that he has this one strict rule about everyone going to the land area. And I wish that they could have actually expanded upon that a little bit to give a bit more of a structured development, this structured character arc of who King Triton is. I feel like that would have been one character I felt like could have used a bit more of this enhancement had they had used the opportunity. That, right? I think the one that I really was just kind of like was a bit of a waste was Ariel's sister. Like, they only appear like maybe in 2 scenes, but it's just about those 2 or 3 scenes. Like, they really could have just, like, honestly speaking, like, thinking about it, like, you could have just completely cut them out, because you had all these like 7 and 8 actors playing out Ariel's sisters, but they don't really have much to do. Whereas at least in the original animated film, because of the fact that they did have the Daughters of Triton song, that they actually had something to do. But in the live action version, they completely cut off that song. That song is not in that movie. So, like, it definitely felt like they had to force upon bringing Ariel's sister for the sake of the fact that Ariel's sister appeared in the animated version, and we had to show them the live action version, but they don't really do much about them overall. I feel like they were kind of basically wasted. The whole situation with how they handle the side characters isn't even the biggest issue in the movie. The biggest issue in the movie is the CGI. Like, honestly, the first 5 minutes of the movie, I had already spotted a CGI issue. I had spotted a very weird way of how they were trying to visualize some of the images of the under the sea, and it just did not really work out well. Like, you can see a lot of things were a bit clunky, a bit weird. The way that some of the people were moving in the water just did not seem very natural. A lot of things just did not look right in terms of the CGI, and I feel like that was probably the biggest miss in regards to this film, that again was a bit off-putting at times. And I think that again having like looked upon the CGI, I wish that they could have did like a bit more time to make things look far more natural and how they moved, how they really kind of structured a lot of things under the sea, and of course again how they picturized a lot of the sea animals, sea creatures in the sea, such as Flounder and Sebastian. It's worth mentioning how a bit creepy it is just to watch, this big-eyed crab or lobster or whatever, right, of Sebastian in the big screen, and then there's just this really weird talking flounder swimming around and singing "Kiss the Girl." There was definitely some CGI issues that I just wish they could have, executed in a much different way. But yeah, I think that when it comes to this movie, like, although they had a lot of big positives and a lot of things that did work out, whether it be the love story, the structure, the Ariel characterization, like the CGI kind of made things a bit more off-putting with the actual whole film, like because of this huge shortcoming that it does take away a little bit of the enjoyment factor of this film. Because had it not been for those reasons, like this movie could have been, probably could have like ranked as one of the best Disney remakes, even though it definitely does rank as some of the better Disney remakes I have seen so far. It's worth talking about the songs a little bit. Like, I think, like, for me, I didn't really notice too much of the lyrical changes with the songs, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but I did pay attention to the new songs that they added into this version. So the ones that were not in the animated version but were made exclusive for the live action. I believe there were 3. So there was Scuttlebutt for the first time and While Uncharted Waters. Like, here's the thing, I think in terms of the new songs that we did get, like, I have a mixed bag about it. I think the one that I definitely did like, I thought was very creative, was For the First Time. I think that was the one that I was like, wow, like, this is a very creative take of, giving Halle Bailey a second chance to really again sing in the film, even though by this point she had already lost her voice. And yet, even with that being the case, like, they were able to be a bit more creative, a bit more imaginative about allowing themselves to add in this additional Ariel song, so that way Halle Bailey can have another chance. And it does work out pretty well in this film. Like, I mean, I really like how you can see Ariel just exploring the world, really understanding that, wow, I'm finally here. Like, this is my moment to really just look around and explore. And I really like that added song. I feel like, it definitely gave it a bit more of a substance by adding this song, adding this, new feature of the movie comparison to the animated film. So I think that was definitely one plus side of some of the new songs that we did get. I feel like a lot of people are talking about Scuttlebutt because that one has definitely been the mixed reaction. I will say this, right? When I hold the Scuttlebutt song, like, I will say that the fact that they kind of, added in the more, Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda sort of style to it, it definitely was a bit awkward to add it. Like, the actual style of it was what really made the song a bit awkward, because when you are looking at a film like, The Little Mermaid, right, a lot of the songs are a bit more smooth, or soothing. There isn't really any too, drastic about the changes, but the Scuttlebutt song was definitely just kind of very different. It just really stood out as like the most unique song in this film, but it's so different because of the style of it, because again, it is very Lin-Manuel Miranda, like Hamilton type of song, because it is that sort of rap. And I think that probably is why a lot of people are so off put by it. Like, for me, it was definitely a bit of a shock. I was just kind of like, I remember exactly my reaction. I was just thinking, what just happened? It was definitely a bit of a shock right there. I wouldn't say it's a totally awful song. I just felt like the actual style of it is what really made it a bit of an off-putting experience watching it in theaters. Of course, the last song, which is called The Wild Uncharted Waters, which is basically Eric's song, and this is like the big change from the animated movie, because we don't actually have Eric's song in the animated film, but in this one they do. And I mean, I wasn't too big of a fan of it. Like, I'm a bit indifferent about the actual song. Like, I didn't really have much of a feel to it. I know a lot of people are really enjoying that song, but that was probably the one that I just could really care less about. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that third song. All, like, in terms of The Little Mermaid, right? As a remake to a classic, like, I think this is definitely one of the better ones I have seen so far. Because again, I think when we are looking at a subtle details, some of the more small details they do change, it does work in a way that again enhances the actual storyline. I feel like with a film like the 1989 version of Little Mermaid, like, because of a lot of issues that were present in that film. This is a live action version that definitely needed to make some modifications that are a bit more modern to today's society, make it so that's far more progressive, and it does work out so well in the end, adding in those changes, even if they were a bit more on the small side. And I think because of those changes, it's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this version of Little Mermaid. I think I enjoyed those small changes, the way that they actually structure the story and the way that they really deliver upon some of the big general gist, like some of the big parts of the film very well in this version than the animated, because again, this version takes a bit more time, dedicates a bit more time to allow things to really develop, such as Eric and Ariel's love story, and again, the idea of who Ariel is as a character, her ferocity, her daringness, and all that sort of stuff, like making so as if Ariel is the focus of this film regardless of everything that's going on around. I think that's one of the biggest things that really, again, is the biggest improvement from this live action from the animated, where the animated doesn't really take that time, or doesn't at least dedicate a bit more of that expansion of its story to make it so that this is always going to be Ariel's film, and making so that she is someone who isn't just, falling upon some of the stereotypes and typical, motifs and themes. Those are changes that I feel like I really appreciate from this live action, because again, when we look at the animated version of Little Mermaid, it is a bit more stereotypical with a lot of the things that they are trying to cover, right? And I think it's because of those changes, again, that are very necessary to improve upon the original film. And I have to give some props to the director as well, to basically to Marshall, for some of the decisions that he did take in terms of trying to, execute, trying to deliver upon his live action version of the Little Mermaid. Because one of the things that it's definitely going to be the biggest problem, right, is the CGI. Like, aside from the fact that I have criticized a little bit of the CGI, I do at least want to compliment him on some of the direction, some of the decisions that he has made, so that it wasn't a much bigger disaster than it should be, but it wasn't. And that's because there are some things that he is a bit more smart about in terms of the changes that he does make from the original animated movie. So, like, I mean, over the weekend I was reading a couple of changes that they were making, and there was one that he cut up something about the polyps or something. And I will say there are some things that he does make some smart changes, because there are things from the animated movie that works for an animated movie, because again, the cartoonish side of it all works in those aspects, but trying to replicate it onto a live action screen just would not work, because it would just be a bit more comical. It would just not look natural. It would just be impossible to really just do things from the anime movie and make it a total replication of it in live action just because it shows up in an anime. There are things it just is not meant to be on live action, and that's something I do want to and that's one thing I do want to compliment with Marshall with making these decisions, because he does have a pretty big task on his hand. Like, this is not an easy movie to put onto the big screen as a live action, because again, you're using an animated movie as its benchmark, using as your standard to trying to replicate a different version into live action. And yeah, there are things that will not work 100% of the time, or it just won't be the most perfect film. But as long as you are able to realize where some things can work and some things can't, I think overall, because Marshall was able to distinguish some of the things that just are just impossible to replicate on the live action screen, that it does again help out a little bit to add a bit more of that sophistication into this one. I think what's also worth mentioning is that this is a live action film. Like, because of the fact that it is live action, it is a bit more darker, it's a bit more grimmer with its whole atmosphere in comparison to the animated version. Like, the animated version is very family friendly, very comical. I mean, again, with the whole cartoon side of it all, it does give off a much more G-rated friendly vibe out of it. Like, there isn't anything too dark about it, whereas in this one you definitely get a bit of this dark subtleness to it, just because it is a live action film. And not just that, but I mean, let's be honest, like, the whole animated Disney princess version of the Little Mermaid, the one that we know from the 1989 version, like, that's not even the original, right? The original Little Mermaid is an actual novel that was written in like the late 1800s. I can't even remember the actual guy's name, but it is a novel. The actual original Little Mermaid is a novel, and the actual story itself is very, very dark. It is actually far more darker than what we saw with the animated film, and even with this live action. I feel like the live action is basically a very good balance between the animated friendly version of Disney version that we see from the 1989 version, and then putting in a little bit of that darkness from the original novel. So it kind of balances out a lot of things from the original anime as well as the original novel. But at the end of the day, like when I finished watching The Little Mermaid, I definitely enjoyed it. Like I felt I was really satisfied. I was really rewarded with the product that we did get, regardless of the backlash, the criticisms, the things that, there were some flaws to the film. Regardless of that, I think that I felt this was a version that was very fulfilling and trying to replicate, trying to be the remake of the original animated 1989 version. And I think at the end of the day, it does work out. It is a very good remake. It's not the most perfect remake. Again, I will still argue that Cinderella is probably the best Disney remake, live action remake out there. But I would say that even with this version, I think it definitely, definitely ends up in kind of my top 5. So yeah, I think overall, if I were to like rate this movie, I think I would probably give a pretty solid like 3.75 out of 5. Again, I think with this film, it does have a lot of big positives to it. Halle Bailey, the actual enhancement of some of the story structure, the changes, Eric and Ariel's love story, some of the changes that they do make, the humor out of it. But there's also some negatives like the CGI being a bit more problematic, some songs not really being a big hit with me. But even with that being the case, I think this is a film I feel like I thoroughly did enjoy for the most part. A lot of people in my theater actually enjoyed for the most part. Like by the time this movie got to the credits, the people were actually clapping. So if they're enjoying it and I'm enjoying it, I think that this is a film that definitely is capable of making sure that not only is it able to be a Disney Princess remake, but doing so in a way that's very satisfying and is a very faithful animated adaptation remake, but also doing so in a way that you can add up these changes that work so far more into this version, even if again it might just be replicating most of what we've seen already in the animated film. But even that being the case, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's all I have to say about The Little Mermaid. That's how I feel about it. Let me know what your thoughts are. Have you seen this movie? And if so, what are your thoughts about it? What do you think about Halle Bailey's casting as Ariel? What do you think about those? What do you feel about the changes that they do make in this film? Do you like those changes? Do you not like those changes? Or are there certain ones that you did like and didn't like? Let me know. As well as what you feel about Eric and Ariel's love story. Like for me, I think that was one of the biggest improvements of this film in comparison to the original one. What do you think about some of the other aspects about the film? Did you enjoy overall? What are your thoughts about the new songs, as well as some of the changes that they do make to the lyrics? And let me know if you have any other comments about The Little Mermaid. Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.